he discovered cells. He invented the functional microscope. He even understood gravity before Newton. But there is one thing about Robert Hooke that textbooks completely ignored. He was a devout Christian who saw science as worship. His story was buried until now. One of the greatest experimental scientists in history was also a devoted Christian whose faith motivated everything he did. His name was Robert Hooke. You've probably never heard of him, and that's by design. Newton gets all the glory. But Hooke discovered cells, invented modern microscopy, and grasped the principles of gravity before Newton diddle, while holding a sincere Christian faith. This is the story they erased. Robert Hooke was born in 1635 on the Isle of Wight. His father was a clergyman, and unlike many who might rebel, Hooke embraced his Christian upbringing. His faith became central to his identity. By his early 20s, he was already working with Robert Boyle on groundbreaking experiments. By age 27, he became the curator of experiments for the Royal Society, one of the most prestigious scientific positions in the world. And here's the crucial point. Hooke was undoing science in spite of his faith. He was doing science as an expression of it. For him, faith and science were inseparable. In 1665, Hooke published Micrographia, a book filled with detailed drawings of what he saw through his improved microscope. His most famous observation was of cork tissue. He saw tiny, box-like compartments that reminded him of monastery cells. So, he called them cells. Every single time a biologist mentions cells today, they are using Hooke's word. Micrographia revealed a hidden world of insects, plant tissues, and microorganisms details no human had ever seen before. The king was amazed, and the scientific community was revolutionized. But Hooke did so much more. He proposed that light traveled in waves, revolutionary idea at the time. He studied magnetism, improved telescopes, investigated fossils, and even proposed early theories of extinction. He made key observations about gravity and helped rebuild London after the Great Fire of 1666. Working alongside Christopher Wren on the magnificent St. Paul's Cathedral, this man was a true polymath, a genius. Yet today, most people have never even heard his name. Hooke lived during the scientific revolution, a time when faith and science weren't yet seen as enemies. He was a deeply committed Christian who attended church regularly. His personal papers are filled with prayers and biblical reflections. He once wrote, "The true philosophy is not to make a noise or take up much room in the world, but to observe the world and get its true history." Like Newton, Hooke viewed science as a form of worship. By understanding how the world worked, he believed he was understanding God's divine design. Observing nature carefully, experimenting rigorously, this was how he honored the Creator. When Hooke peered through his microscope and saw the intricate structure of a flea or a plant cell, he didn't just see biology. He saw evidence of God's magnificent handiwork. The complexity, the order, the purpose. His faith wasn't a separate part of his life, it was the very foundation of his science. So, where did it all go wrong? Here's where Hooke's legacy gets buried. When Isaac Newton proposed that light was made of tiny particles, Hooke disagreed, championing his wave theory instead. This sparked a bitter, decades-long rivalry. Hooke challenged Newton publicly, which was a huge mistake. Newton was fiercely competitive and held grudges. When Hooke died in 1703, Newton, who was then the head of the Royal Society, systematically erased him from history. Newton's supporters allegedly destroyed portraits of Hooke. They downplayed his achievements and credited Newton with some of Hooke's discoveries. The irony: Hooke's wave theory of light was proven correct centuries later. But by then, generations of scientists had been taught that Newton was always right and Hooke was just a nuisance. Why was Robert Hooke so thoroughly forgotten? Part of it was Newton's deliberate campaign against him. But there's a deeper reason. The scientific establishment needed a specific narrative. They wanted a story where science and religion were enemies, with scientific heroes fighting against religious superstition. Newton could be positioned as a figure of pure reason. But Hooke was different. He was openly, unapologetically spiritual. He connected his science to his faith explicitly, and that just didn't fit their story. So, gradually, Hooke faded from the textbooks. His discoveries were forgotten or attributed to others. By the 20th century, he was a footnote in history. Hooke, never married, was known to be socially awkward and was a perfectionist. When he died, his funeral was poorly attended and his estate was mishandled. The scientific community simply moved on, conveniently forgetting the brilliant believer. In recent decades, however, historians have started to rediscover Robert Hooke. Scholars digging into primary sources found the undeniable truth. Hooke had made discoveries that predated Newton, contradicted Newton, and were ultimately proven correct. A quiet revolution has begun in how we talk about him. Among serious historians, he's now recognized as one of the greatest experimental minds in scientific history, and with that rediscovery, his faith is finally being acknowledged too. We now understand that Hooke saw no contradiction between rigorous experimentation and his Christian belief. He prayed and he observed. He questioned and he worshipped. The greatest truth modern science tried to suppress is this: some of history's greatest scientists were devoutly religious, and that faith is what motivated their brilliance. So, what does Robert Hooke's story teach us today? First, that the conflict between science and faith is not a historical fact. It's a constructed story, often told by people with an agenda. Hooke proves you can be brilliant and faithful, empirical and spiritual, rigorous and reverent. Second, Hooke's faith seems to have kept him humble. He understood that human knowledge is limited, and that humility made him a better, more curious scientist. And third, Hooke's story shows what happens when power is used to erase inconvenient truths. His faith was buried right along with his legacy. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Robert Hooke spent his life looking closely at creation, so closely that he could see into worlds no human had ever witnessed. And what did he find there? He saw evidence of intelligence, of design, of God. That conviction didn't weaken his science. It fueled it. He is a powerful model for us today. A scientist who understood that questions about how the universe works are inseparable from questions about its meaning and purpose. Faith and science don't have to be at war. Throughout history, many of the greatest minds saw them as partners in the same quest for truth. What do you think? Does Hooke's story change how you see the relationship between science and faith? Let me know in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe for more untold stories about the history that textbooks don't teach. Thanks for watching.